What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for my top 25 heading into week 5, and can you believe it? A third of the regular season is already over for most teams. Most teams have already played 4 games. That means they'll play 8 games the rest of the way. So this season going by quick like it always does, and if you haven't followed me, you haven't watched my other top 25 videos, I'm ranking these teams based off of what I have seen this year, not looking at the names on the jerseys, not looking at where we rank teams in the preseason or anything like that, just basing this off of what we have seen. And as we get further into the season, I start to look a little bit more at the resume. Obviously, teams are still, a lot of teams don't really have much of a resume, but we start to look at that a little bit, especially in tiebreaker situations. You know, if I think 2 teams are very similar, well, which team has the better wins, things like that. So let's get into it here, and we're going to start at the bottom. Actually, before we get into the top 25, I wanted to recognize these teams. I did not rank them, but I want to give them some love here. Louisville, Syracuse, Kentucky, Maryland, Fresno State, Air Force, Georgia State, Marshall, James Madison, and Liberty. All of these teams are undefeated, and just to get to 4-0 is a pretty big accomplishment, even if you haven't played the toughest schedule. I'd like to rank some of these teams. Fresno State, I really feel like they're a top 25 team. Maryland, Kentucky, Syracuse, Louisville. I mean, these look like they're going to be good teams, but I just haven't seen enough yet to where I know that they are. I need to see them play some better competition. You know, you look at Fresno State, for example, they barely beat Purdue. We now know that Purdue is just not a very good team. And so if they're similar to Purdue, then they're not a top 25 team, although they did blow out Arizona State, who just gave USC a fight this past week. So I just need to see a little bit more. They'll have some games against some of the top teams in the Mountain West. If they can look really good in those games, I'll probably rank them. Or just if you continue to win. I mean, at some point, you continue to win and you got Power 5 wins, you're going to get in the top 25. Louisville, some big opportunities coming up for them. Syracuse will have tougher games. Kentucky has Florida this weekend. And so, again, I just need to see a little bit more out of those teams. The teams on the right probably won't ever be ranked for me, but we'll see. So let's get into the top 25 now. All right, 21 through 25. Kansas at number 25. They are 4-0, just beat an undefeated BYU team, a BYU team that beat Arkansas. So that's enough. I mean, that's not a great win. I think most people aren't super high on BYU. But that's a good enough win for me to put this team in the top 25. They've also got a win over Illinois, and it's just a team that's good. I mean, they're a good football team. I got them at 4-0. Ole Miss, not great against Alabama, not a very good performance. The good news here, though, is they do have wins over Georgia Tech and Tulane, and Tulane is a team that I had ranked last week. Just didn't have room for them this week. But another thing about my top 25 is I don't just move teams up and down. It is a completely brand new top 25. Every week I go back and I look at the entire season, not just this past weekend. Look at the entire season and kind of compare these teams. So Tennessee, a nice win over UTSA this week. They've also got the win over Virginia, where they completely dominated. Virginia just went toe-to-toe with NC State, so that looks a little bit better now for Tennessee. They just had a bad game against Florida, I believe. So I've got them back in the top 25. Kansas State, really impressive against UCF. And just a heartbreaking loss to Missouri, of course. Florida at 3-1. Didn't really play, I think, Charlotte this week. So not a big game or anything. But they've got the win over Tennessee. And played Utah pretty tough if you look at the big picture and look at all the mistakes that they made. So I think Florida now in the top 25. But Kentucky going to be trying to get that spot this week. If Kentucky beats Florida, can pretty much guarantee the Wildcats will be in the top 25 next week, and Florida probably will not. All right, 16 through 20 here. We got Texas A&M number 20. Impressive against Auburn. I don't really think Auburn's going to be great this year. But again, I think Miami is good, and their win over Texas A&M is enough for me to put them at number 18. They've completely dominated against bad teams. And that's all you can do. I mean, that's really all you can do. Missouri went over Memphis. Pretty good Memphis team this week. And, of course, the win over Kansas State, that's enough to get them up to 19. Washington State. So I said last week, I was talking about Missouri, Kansas State, Florida, Tennessee. All 4 of those teams, are they top 25 teams? Are they good teams? Are they all bad teams? Because their wins were against each other. Missouri's win was over Kansas State. Florida's win was over Tennessee. And I think we've seen enough now to know that those 4 teams are all good teams. Washington State at 17. 2 pretty good wins on the resume now. Went over an undefeated UCLA team, undefeated at the time. A win over Wisconsin. That's the only game Wisconsin has lost. They look good against Purdue. So, yeah, Washington State looking like a very dangerous team. Utah just ahead of them at 16. They are also 4-0. Now, it's hard for me to rank Utah because we have not seen them with Cam Rising, and I want to rank them with him as a starting quarterback, assuming he's about to come back. The defense is really, really good, but based off of what I've seen this year, again, without Cam Rising, the offense has struggled. So that's why I've got Utah number 16. Cam Rising comes back. They start to look really good offensively. I could shoot them up into the top 10, even the top 5 potentially, seeing how things go these next couple of weeks. So Utah at 16. Now let's go to 11 through 15. Duke is at number 15. Again, a big win over Clemson. I think Clemson's performance against Florida State makes that win look even better. They've dominated against bad teams, really. Their win over Northwestern now looks better because Northwestern just beat Minnesota. So Duke, maybe I'm not even being fair to Duke. Maybe I should rank them a little bit higher. It's just, Clemson now has 2 losses, and that's their best win. But Duke they're going to have their opportunity against Notre Dame. If they beat Notre Dame, you could see Duke in the top 5. I mean, that's how much I'm willing to move teams, especially this early in the season. So that's the game we're waiting on to see if they can prove that the Clemson game was not a fluke. And again, you go back to that game. So many mistakes by Clemson, fumbling inside the 10-yard line twice. I'm not totally sold on that game being a good indicator of Duke. Again, I want to see one more game against a good team, and we'll get that opportunity on Saturday. LSU number 14. Boy, this team is so inconsistent. Just go to the first half against Florida State. Great in the first half, terrible in the second half. Mississippi State, great performance. Arkansas, not good. They had to squeak one out there. So I don't know about LSU. I know when they are good, they're really, really good, but they've got to be more consistent. Oklahoma, 4-0. Defense so much better this year, and that's the big story there. Offense maybe not quite as good as it was last year, so that's interesting, but the defense has come a long ways, and this team is definitely going to be the biggest threat to Texas in the Big 12. North Carolina up to number 12, passed a big test against Pittsburgh. I was worried about this game. I said it in the video yesterday. These are the types of games that North Carolina typically loses. They took care of business there. And you can make an argument that they had a better win over South Carolina. They were more impressive against South Carolina than Georgia was. And so if you want to put North Carolina ahead of Georgia, I'm not really going to argue with that. The App State game does make me a little hesitant, and they did have to go to overtime to beat them. Georgia hasn't had a struggle like that. But anyways, North Carolina number 12, Alabama number 11. I'm not even really looking at the South Florida game anymore because they didn't have Milroe at quarterback. He is their guy, so I'm really just basing this off of those other 3 games. Texas did beat them in that second half, but overall, Alabama's still a good team, and they proved that against Ole Miss. Let's go to number 10, USC. They are 4-0, but did not look great against Arizona State. Really don't have a great win. They've been pretty impressive in their other games, but the defense has work to do. Now that I'm really thinking about this, should USC be ranked ahead of a team like Duke? And again, I go back to that Clemson game. Was it a little bit of a fluky win, at least winning the way that by 3 touchdowns or 2 touchdowns, whatever it was? Not that the win was a fluke, but that they won by so much. So USC, we'll see. They'll get an opportunity against Colorado this week. We'll see if they can be impressive, kind of like Oregon was, or if that's a close game, like a really close game, I'm probably going to start dropping USC until they get a big win. Let's go to number 9, Notre Dame, 4-1. I don't think they should be penalized a whole lot by losing because they lost to Ohio State. Ohio State looks like a top 5 team, and they had that game won. They really should have won. You only put 10 guys on the field in the last 2 plays. That might cost you the game. So Notre Dame, I still feel like this is a good team. I like what I've seen for them. Sam Hartman gives them an upgrade in the pass game. And I don't know if they can run the table. A tough schedule the rest of the way, but if they can get back in that playoff conversation. Number 8 is Georgia. And again, I know I think this is crazy. How can Georgia be at number 8? Well, I'm not basing this off of what has happened in the past. Not looking at the last 2 years. I'm looking at what I've seen this year. And if you followed me, you know I've got Georgia going to the national championship. That's been my prediction as we've gotten into the season. Because I think the potential is there. I think this team can be that good. We just have not seen it. And I'm only ranking these teams based off of what I've seen this year. They've had slow starts against bad teams, cupcake games, and even against South Carolina. They were down at halftime by multiple scores, but we saw in the second half what they're capable of. They've just got to bring it. I mean, they've got to play like that. If they played like that all the time, they'd be number one because they would just be absolutely destroying all these teams. But they have not done that, and that's why I've got them at number 8. And it's kind of the same story with Michigan. Michigan, and they do this every year. It's just kind of how they seem to play against bad teams. They just look pretty good, but they don't look overly impressive. Now, Rutgers is a pretty decent team. I think we've seen enough to know that they're decent, and Michigan did wind up blowing them out, but it just hasn't been an overly dominant performance out of Michigan so far. Again, this is the team that I've got. I've had them. My prediction has been that Michigan's going to win the national championship this year. So I think that they can be the best team in the country, but based off of what we have seen through 4 weeks, they have not looked better than these top 6 teams. So let's go to number 6. That's Oregon. You're telling me that based off these 4 games, Michigan has looked better than Oregon? No, they haven't. Oregon has looked like a better team. That does not mean that I would pick Oregon to beat Michigan head-to-head. I'm only basing this off of performance, and also now we're starting to get into the resume game. Oregon has a win over Colorado. That's better than anything Michigan has. They also went on the road and beat Texas Tech. They did struggle in that game a little bit, and that's why I don't have them in the top 5. But overall, the offense, the way they're playing, Oregon has played, in my opinion, better than Michigan and Georgia, and so I've got them at number 6. Number 5 is Washington, another team that's played really, really well. Boise State blowout win, Michigan State blowout win. This team, they just haven't had any struggles at all. They don't have the win that Oregon has, like the win over Colorado, but they also don't have the struggle like Oregon had against Texas Tech. That's why I've got Washington ahead of Oregon. So let's go to number 4 now. Ohio State, they are 4-0 with a big win over Notre Dame on the road. You look at the entire season, first 2 games, they looked okay. I said it last week. I felt like against Western Kentucky, they really started to find themselves offensively. Going up against a good Notre Dame defense this week, but the offense really wasn't great for Ohio State. But the defense has been great. They've been really, really good on that side of the ball. A huge improvement from last year. If the offense can get it together and start to play just a little bit better, Ohio State's going to be really tough for anyone to beat, and that's what we're waiting on. So the win over Notre Dame does put them into the top 4 for me because, again, that's one of the best wins of the season so far. All right, so I'm sure there'll be some debate here on the top 3. I've got Florida State number 3. Yes, I realize I had them at number 1, and they just went on the road and they beat Clemson, and that was really, really impressive. But you have to look at the big picture and everything that I'm looking at when I rank these teams. So a couple of things. First of all, Clemson has 2 losses, and we think it looks like the way Clemson played, they look like a good team, but they've got 2 losses. We don't know. Maybe Clemson's a 6-6 team this year. Again, it's early. They're 2-2 right now. I feel like they're going to finish strong, but I don't know that. So that win over Clemson, while I do think it's impressive, it's hard to say for sure. But also what changed here is LSU. The reason Florida State stayed at number 1 for me last week after they did not look great against Boston College was because of how good LSU looked against Mississippi State. And I'm like, wow, LSU is actually really, really good. And Florida State beat them, and they dominated in the second half. I'm going to keep them at number 1. That was my thought there. But now you see LSU struggle against Arkansas. And so maybe with the inconsistency there, Florida State's win over LSU doesn't look quite as good. And then you circle back to the game against Boston College where they struggled. That's why they've dropped to 3 for me. But still, I'm really high on Florida State. I think they have a good chance to go undefeated the rest of the way. It's just that the top 2 teams have been a little bit more consistent. So Texas at number 2. They've got the win over Alabama. Really, really good win there. And now they have an impressive win over Baylor. I realize Baylor is not great this year. They did go toe-to-toe with Utah, but Texas goes on the road and they completely dominate in that game. You compare that to Florida State against Boston College, similar situations, and Texas just was a lot more dominant. So that's why I've got Texas over Florida State, even though Florida State does have better wins if you count the wins over LSU and Clemson. But again, it's hard to compare when you've only got 4 games. I feel like Texas has been a little bit more consistent. I've got them at number 2, but the most consistent team for me has been Penn State. Penn State has absolutely dominated every game they've played, And they played some pretty good teams. West Virginia, they dominate that game. West Virginia's 3-1 right now. They just beat Texas Tech. You look at just the game this past weekend against Iowa. Iowa was a top 25 team. They shut them out. They completely dominated that game as well. This Penn State team, you go Illinois. You got Illinois in there. Illinois hasn't been great this year, but Penn State dominated against a Power 5 conference opponent on the road. I mean, this has been the most consistent team. They've been the most impressive team so far to me. They don't have the signature win that Texas has or Florida State has or Ohio State has. And if you just want to go off of signature wins, maybe Penn State should be at number 4. But those are good wins. Those are very quality wins, especially the win over Iowa. And it's the way they've won those games where they have completely dominated. There are no real weaknesses with this Penn State team. Defense has been lights out. Run game, of course, really good. And Drew Aller has played really, really well for his first year being the starter. So that, to me, this has just been the most consistent team through 4 games. Would they beat Texas? Would they beat Florida State? I don't know. I'm not saying that they would, but they have performed the best, and that's what I'm ranking teams based off of here in again, only 4 weeks into the season. So I'm sure a lot of you will disagree with a lot of this. I know everyone seems to have a hard time with Georgia and Michigan not being 1 and 2, but can you honestly say, based off of the performances this year, that Georgia and Michigan have looked better than Penn State, Texas, Florida State, Ohio State, Washington, Oregon? You can't. I mean, you're lying to yourself if you say that. Now, would they beat these teams? If you want to make that argument, maybe they would, but their performance has not shown that, and we've got a long ways to go. So, just because I have the teams ranked here now does not mean Georgia cannot go to number 1 just within a couple of weeks. Brand new top 25 every week as we continue to evaluate and learn about these teams. We'd love to get your thoughts, though, and your top 25. Let me know what you think down in the comments below.